Hello everyone, welcome to Dr. Fluffy. Today I'm answering the latest video from Laci Green and I'm answering with a very open mind. I actually haven't watched the entire video. I just watched like 1 minute of it and I'm going in with that open mind. See what Laci has to say this time about gender because I liked the first minute of it and sorry Laci that I'm going to speed up your voice, but I don't want the video to go much higher than 15 minutes and yours was a lot longer, so I want to avoid cutting it as much as possible so I don't misrepresent you, even though I always leave the link in the description. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on the matter because I'm really liking the new format of your videos about actually asking people what they really think.
Well, this will be a nightmare. Let's continue the journey, shall we? The past month or so, I've been talking a lot about speech, censorship, and I'd like to move on to the next topic now, which is about how many genders there are. I want to talk about only two, and TERFs, and Tumblr genders, and Zs and Zer. Some people have spammed literally every video that I've ever made about the nature of gender and sex with only two. Okay, point taken. So I hopped on Twitter and asked those of you who do feel that there are only two, why you feel that way.
While keeping it short so that we can talk about it later on, it's very simple, Laci. Gender is about your biology. It's just the name that you use in society to describe your biological sex. And we all know there's only two biological sex. We have intersex cases, but those account for just 0.018% of the population, and they are not a third gender. They're just people from one gender with a birth defect that makes it hard to tell which one of the genders they are, but they are one of the genders. They're not a third gender.
And in even asking that question, I got, a little bit of backlash from the feminist side of things. It's problematic, or it's hurtful, or it's invalidating, and I understand why some people might find it upsetting. But I'm going to talk about it, because I feel that this conversation is really at the core of feminism. It's very relevant to sex ed. It's not just something that can't be discussed. The idea here is not to invalidate anyone's identity, anyone's experience of gender. It's to understand what the whole scope of those experiences look like.
I understand you're trying to be nice, Laci, but here's the thing. Gender is not something that you experience. It's something that you are born with. What people experience is their personality. And what's happening right now is people are mistaking personality with gender. I hope can explore that further on.
And how they lead people to understand gender the way they do. I think it's fascinating and I want to talk about it. Feminists and anti-feminists alike, in the course of this conversation, you may very well find yourself disagreeing with some of the things that I'm going to say. And I say, cool, tell me why. I'm open to other perspectives. I'm open to changing my mind on this stuff. I have before, but I need strong arguments. I need arguments that are logically sound, that are not based on emotions, arguments that are backed by science and data wherever possible, with strong would absolutely get off to responses that address what I actually say. Oh my
I'll do just that, Laci. Don't worry.
god, Laci supports harassment. No. Oh my god, Laci hates men. No. Oh my god, Laci's a white supremacist now. Chris is the white supremacist, not me. Just a little low-key shade for you there. I see three political groups, three basic philosophies in this conversation.
While I understand where you're coming from, I don't even think this is a political issue, Laci. This is a scientific, biological issue. I don't have a position about this in terms of politics. I have a position in this in terms of as a biologist, as a scientist, as someone that studies science and does not appreciate people distorting scientific terms and distorting a scientific issue.
About gender. Anti-feminists say there are two. Only two. Radical feminists say, well, gender doesn't actually really exist. And liberal feminists say, well, gender is infinite and it's expanding. How are we all looking at the same thing, at gender, and coming to such wildly different conclusions about it?
I don't actually see that much difference between there's no such thing as gender being infinite. Those two things are actually very similar in terms of practical reasons and in terms of logistics. They both don't work. They do not represent reality.
That's the question, right? For starters, I'm not convinced that we are all looking at the same thing. Genitals, specifically. This is a penis and this is a vulva. In biology class, or maybe porn, we all learned that genitals are a part of human sexuality, in large part because they help us to reproduce. It's the survival of the species, right? Life on Earth, wow, so beautiful. There are basically two sets of equipment that allow humans to reproduce. That is male and female, XY and XX. That is basically sex. Basically. A more comprehensive account of biological sex includes 4 traits. You've got chromosomes, hormones, primary sex characteristics, and secondary sex characteristics.
Everything you just said was correct. There are 2 little corrections that I do have to point out. The basically part I don't understand why you're saying basically, because you're completely correct in what you said. And all of those three other things that you mentioned are controlled by your chromosomes. So basically, your sex is controlled completely by your chromosomes. The other two things are just the result of your chromosomes.
And there's a little variation here, right? Low key. I mean, you got, females that are infertile, you got males that have more boobage, all that kind of stuff.
There are a lot of different levels of variations. Like estrogen levels and testosterone levels do change from individual to individual. That's a part of evolution. Like most of the time, males with the higher testosterone were the ones who reproduce. Females with more estrogen were the ones who reproduce because they were more fertile. But that's small variations. In terms of females being infertile, that's actually called something called an illness. It's actually not common. It's normally results of small genetic problems with the person. And males can be infertile too. That's unfortunately health conditions that do happen. Most of the time they're genetic, but they do not change sex.
Then you also have, about 1 in 2,000 people are intersex. They have both male and female bits.
Well, I have my War on Gender video where I explained better this issue, but in a very quick way, intersex is a several different genetic defects that happen to a person that unfortunately are negative mutations that give them vestigial organs that should not be there from the other sex, and sometimes make the organs difficult to tell which sex they are. But they are not different sexes. They are a person from one sex that unfortunately has vestigial characteristics from another. Now, without looking at genetics, it's very hard to tell which sex the person is, but thankfully now with new technology we can look at where the genetic defect is, so we can try to identify better which is the original sex of the person.
Another part of the variation is trans folks, who will transition between male and female using hormones and surgery.
This is also a result of a genetic defect that causes a problem with the brain that is called gender dysphoria. Some people like to use different names to refer to gender dysphoria. Some people call it a mental disorder, some people call it a mental illness. It can fit both categories, but what it means is that it's not a normal thing. It is basically, yes, an illness. The transition between both binary genders is the current treatment that we have available to treat the persons under these conditions. But again, it's in the binary scale. As you can see, a male transitions to a female and a female transitions to a man. Also, this condition affects less than 0.3% of the human population. And this is already counting, for example, the intersex people. 0.3%. That's not relevant in a statistical manner. If you do a ANOVA variance analysis, this will not take into account a new gender.
What's notable about sex is that all mammals have one. The vast majority of mammals are either XX or XY, just like us. There are some animals that have traits from both. Just like us, there are animals that transition between sexes. But what's not just like us, what other animals don't have, in my book, is gender.
I will have to disagree. Any animal that has sexual reproduction has gender. And in terms of transitions, no, a lot of different animals don't have the same sexual reproduction as us. For example, we cannot change sex naturally. We do these transformations in terms of technology. Animals do that naturally. So it's not the same thing. It's not equivalent. When we look at gender, we need to look at animals that closely relate to us in terms of our process of gender and sexual reproduction. We cannot compare to animals that, for example, can reproduce both sexually and asexually, because we can't.
Monkeys and tigers, they might be male or female, but they aren't men or women.
As a biologist, I disagree.
Gender is the way that body sex is interpreted and understood in the world, in society.
Yes, Laci, it's how it is interpreted in society, and animals also have a society, and the way that it is interpreted in society is their contribution to society in terms of reproduction and related activities.
The American Psychological Association defines gender as the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that a given culture associates with a person's biological sex. And this is a definition that is widely used by experts.
But they are not experts from the correct field. Psychologists are not scientists. biologists are. And this is a biological issue, not a psychological issue. When we look at proper definitions, and definitions that are widely available since ever, before people started trying to change the definitions, yes, they'll talk about a society and cultural level, but animals have that too. What they mean by this is that it is not referring to the physical aspect, but the physical aspect is the one that influences the psychological aspect of it. And just because you're at like a tomboy, or because a guy is a bit feminine, does not change your gender, because your gender is things that are innate, basically they're programmed into your biology. It's things that correspond to 99.7% of the human population. That's basically a cause and effect right there. For statistically sex to differ from gender, you would need more than 5% to even consider the option of them being different.
But when you look at the definition, it's kind of broad and subjective. Attitudes, feelings, behaviors, like what does that even mean? And I think that this is one of the problems in this conversation, is that the same word is being used to refer to like a million things.
You are correct, Laci. The definition is part of the problem, because the definition that they give you is incorrect. It's not properly defined. It does not hold up in the real world.
Gender sometimes refers to sex. How many genders? Basically two. Gender sometimes refers to society's gender roles. How many? Basically two. Gender sometimes refers to someone's outward gender expression. How many? Potentially infinite.
See, here's the problem start arising. There's no such thing as gender expression. What people call gender expression is basically personality. People have different personalities. Not everybody dresses the same inside their own gender. It's called styles. For example, you have the gothic style, you have the hipster style. Now, instead of calling it, styles and fashion, people are calling it gender. It's not the same thing. You can be of a gender and dress however you want. It does not change your gender.
Gender sometimes refers to individual gender identities. How many? Potentially infinite.
The same problem from before applies. This is not gender. This is to do with your personality. Again, you can be a bit more feminine, a bit more masculine, but this is not about your gender. It's about your personality, how your personality develops. It has nothing to do with your gender.
And gender sometimes refers to labels and pronouns. It's language. How many? Again, potentially infinite.
And again, I must disagree, because the pronouns are, when you're referring to inanimate objects that don't have a gender, that's a different thing. But when you're talking about living things with a gender, with a binary gender like us, you have to call them by the gender. When you're calling, for example, plural, also it does not work, because you're doing a grammatical error. Like you're doing a grammatical error when you call a male she. If you call them they, you're also committing a grammatical error. This is grammar now. And you also cannot just make up words to refer to non-existent genders. Because again, it's a living being, it's a sexual reproductive binary living being, he has only two genders. And you can only refer with the two genders.
Okay, so the word gender can mean a lot of things in this conversation. So I think it's good to be specific. Question now is, well, which one of these definitions of gender do we use when we're talking about things like sexism or transphobia, feminism, anti-feminism, gender differences in society? Well, this is where the anti-feminists, the radical feminists, and the liberal feminist schools of thought start to have some disagreements. Let's take a closer look, shall we? So I asked those of you who feel like there's only two genders to share why. And 53% of you told me there's only two genders because of biology. There's male, female, XY, XX. And it's not a complicated issue. This is fairly straightforward, and so on and so forth. Logically, let's walk through this. In its purest interpretation, gender equals biology implies that all of the differences that we see between men and women in society are ultimately the product of our bodies. We're slaves to our bodies, in a sense, and our social environment doesn't, play a hand in shaping who we are. If biology alone creates the differences between men and women, these differences should be universal throughout the human species across every culture. And it would also be constant throughout history, because biology, sex is the same all over the world. But when I look at the world, that's not what I see. I do see some variation. I see some common themes, some things that seem to be pretty widespread, but there are also a lot of differences, too, between cultures when it comes to gender, and certainly throughout history.
In the core aspects that define gender, no, there's not any variation at all. between people in different places in the world and between history. What you're seeing are differences in terms of the way the genders communicate with each other and the way societies build up around them. But society and the environment do not change what makes a gender a gender. They do not change the chromosomes. They do not change the sexual characteristics. They do not change every aspect that creates gender. The aspect that the woman will always be the one giving birth to the baby. And that's basically the most basic thing that determines gender. And she's the one who cares for the baby. The man cannot breastfeed the baby. The man cannot birth the baby. There's a lot of things that, regardless of how feminist the society is, the man is the one who does the dangerous jobs. The woman is the one who gets the more comfortable jobs. That's like a universal thing that is based on our biology. There will always be superficial differences that do relate to society and culture, but those are superficial things. The basic things that determine gender will always be the same.
How do we account for cultures where the gender roles are completely swapped? How do we account for cultures where there are 3, 4, even 5 genders? I mean, I'm not just making this stuff up. It's real and it exists in the world, and so we have to try to make sense of it.
You're not lying, Laci, but you are misinterpreting what those things are. Those things that those tribes have are not different genders. They only have 2 genders. What they have is exactly, as you said, different society roles. The word gender behind the role is incorrect. These are just society roles. In terms of, like, for example, we have roles like a doctor, lawyer. Those are roles, but they are not gender roles. And in those societies, they divide these roles, but they are not related to this gender or sex. Let me again spend some time on this, because this is very important. When you have 99.7% of people that gender is the same as sex, then gender is sex. In science, when we are testing a theory, we do a ANOVA, analysis of variance. So we create a null hypothesis, and then we have our hypothesis that we want to test. When our data, we put our data forward, and we see if our hypothesis explains the variation that we find, and if the variation that we find is explained by our hypothesis. In this case, the hypothesis is sex is same as gender, or better yet, gender is determined by sex. And when we have 99.7%, the hypothesis is basically proven without a shadow of a doubt, because the 0.3% are what we expect to be errors, and exactly what they are. They are errors, genetic errors, that we already talked about, like intersex and gender dysphoria. Those errors do not account for the third gender or more than one gender. The number tells us which definition of gender is correct, and is the definition that says gender is sex.
None of this is to say that biology plays absolutely no role in our behavior either. There was a meta-analysis that was done recently, which is always preferable because it looks at a whole bunch of studies at once. I think this one looked at, about 45 different studies altogether. So this found that there were, 3 main sex differences that may be very heavily influenced by biology. However, for a lot of gender differences, the evidence overwhelmingly points to both, some role of biology and of our social environment.
Socialization always plays a part in terms of influencing what is biologically natural. Now, we do know by studies, and this has been more than proven, that kids from ages of a couple of months, maybe 8 months, you can already tell psychological and behavior differences between boys and girls. Then socialization actually reduces those differences. Why? Because a lot of parents do influence their kids in the way they want to. But in another thing that we know is that when you have a free society, the differences between males and females maximizes. It does not reduce, it maximizes. Showing that when people are free to decide by themselves, biology overtakes socialization, it overtakes culture. And you see a maximum differences between both genders. There's like a good study, I think, from some good studies, I think, from Sweden. They were actually trying to prove the opposite thing. They had proving how much different genders are.
So the next question then is, well, how much of our gender differences are biological versus social? To what degree does each play a role? And I think that is the interesting question. to, women not being in STEM, there might be a connection there, but the context is different for each. And I think we have to look at all of that. That is, in a nutshell, why I think there is more to gender than just biology.
This is the most crucial part, I think, of the video, Laci, because I think the problem is that you're mistaking personality. That is something that is influenced by your gender, but of course then it's also influenced by culture and the way you grew up with gender. And the reason why they are not the same things, that you cannot use the terms in the same way, is because gender is made in a way to protect both genders in society. For example, when we distinguish between female football and male football, or in case soccer, because this is an American audience, I'm talking about soccer. Why do we do this difference? Because the biological sexes have different strengths. We know that muscular men are more muscular than women, so we divide sports to be fair between them. So it would completely be unfair for male athletes to compete against female athletes. So we do the distinction. A lot of the problems that we are having right now is that because of this confusion about what gender is, males that transition to females, or some that don't even do the transition, are competing as females, for example. And they of course have an overwhelming physical advantage. And no, the hormones that they are taking to get the hormones levels difference does not make a difference, because they already have the muscle mass above the woman's muscle mass. The hormones are not going to make a difference. And then, for example, you have the cases of bathrooms. The reason why we have different bathrooms for both genders is because of privacy and is because of safety. When you go to the bathroom, it's like a private thing. A lot of people don't even like public bathrooms because they already don't feel that much in a privacy. But of course, when you're going, you don't want somebody from the opposite sex to be watching it, to be near you when you're doing such a private thing with your private parts. And of course, most people do not have a problem when someone who transitions, because they already transitioned, they already cut it off, or in the other case, grow it out. And if you pass by a woman, nobody will care. But if you see a man in the same environment or a woman in the same environment with you when you're doing something so private, you will not feel comfortable. You know it's wrong. You'll naturally know that it is wrong. So we are not distinguishing bathrooms in terms of like a different concept of gender. We're distinguishing bathrooms in terms of the sexual organs each of us have. We have a bathroom for the penis and we have a bathroom for the vagina. And the idea is to keep the vagina and penis apart for that intimate, hygienic moment. And when people are against, those laws that say that you can go to whatever bathroom you want, it's about privacy, and it is about reality that those laws would be explored by predators. Not predators that are trans people. We're not calling trans people predators. We're saying that people will pretend to be trans so they can predate on the other sex. And most of these situations would not even make sense when you're calling people non-binary and all different genders, because everything doesn't make sense in practical terms when you don't consider the gender binary. Because in practical terms, in everyday life, when people talk about gender, when people ask your gender, they're not talking about these two fantasy definitions of gender. They're talking about your biological sex. And if we distort the concept of gender, people will start asking you your biological sex. They will stop using gender. They will stop using the word gender, because the practical situations where we need to use the word gender, we are talking about the biological sex. Or at least the morphological sex of the person. We're never talking about these psychological mumbo-jumbo.
But what I do like about this perspective, and what I do take comfort in, that I think a lot of anti-feminists and skeptical types take comfort in, is the fact that gender equals sex is, based on objective information. Sex is relatively easily observable, it's tangible, it's measurable, it's material. Sometimes it's nice to just have things be simple,
Yes, Lacey, and it actually works in the situations where we need to use gender. Like I explained to you, I gave you those two examples, but we can talk a lot of other examples. Even, for example, in terms of profession, in terms of housing, all of those things, when people are asking your gender, they are not talking about things to do with your personality. They're talking about your biological sex, because those are the things that people want to know. They are important for those things.
The other only two reasons you guys gave me, the anti-feminists gave me, is one, that multiple genders defines gender as personality, that was 16% of you, and two, that multiple genders reinforces gender roles, another 16% of you. And there were actually 5% of folks who were all trans who said something similar, that multiple genders trivializes gender dysphoria. In perhaps an unexpected twist, there are feminists who would strongly agree with that.
All of those are actually true, and I've done the videos about especially the last point, and I had trans people coming to my videos and giving me support and subscribing to my channel exactly because I was saying this, that the people that call themselves non-binary are trivializing and are using trans people to become false victims, to pretend to be victims in a world that has given victimization coins. They are like currency right now, Lacey. And that I find insulting, because gender dysphoria is a really serious condition that has very harsh psychological pressure on the persons that suffer from it, and you should not trivialize their experience. I'm glad to see this new side of you, Lacey, because it is really good to see someone from your side of the argument to be more open for debate and to be more open to ideas. I know you're probably not going to see this video because my channel is very small and I don't really have a lot of time for it, because currently I'm not just taking my PhD, I'm doing a lot of research, and I'm right now responsible of my lab. I have a student working under me. I'm taking courses in the middle of this. It's a mess. But I do find these issues important, and I do like to share my opinion as someone who works on the field. Because even in my little country of Portugal, a lot of these things are starting to have repercussions, especially on young minds. And especially because young minds are very susceptible and they need to have all the information available to them, so they cannot fall into this ideological, closed-minded view that I think now you understand a little bit better than you did before, as you're having the backlash against you for opening your mind. Even with my tight schedule, if you ever need something, either leave a comment or send me a message, and I will try to help out however I can. Thank you guys for watching. As usual, if you liked the video, leave a like, tell me what you think about Lacey's new turn and about the issue itself. And don't forget to share if you can. Follow me on Twitter, because I will always share my videos there when they come out. And if you haven't, subscribe. Stay fluffy!